All right. Well, welcome. If you are a subscriber to the Shifting Schools podcast, you're probably wondering why this random episode showed up in your feed. Trish and I don't have a script, but we just wanted to record. And you being our loyal community, we wanted to get you involved in some of the updates that have been going on. So this is an update episode about updates around Shifting Schools and just really are trying to figure out and get some feedback from you around Shifting Schools. We've got a lot of great updates that we want to talk about, and we thought we would involve our community as well and get your feedback. So, Trisha, let's first talk about maybe the biggest visual update of all is we've reworked the front of our website to really be focused on the podcast. Do you want to talk a little bit about what we were kind of going through when we did that?
Yeah, Jeff, I should say that when we are making revisions like this, it is because we get feedback. So listeners, if you're thinking, Jeff and Trisha are always saying email them or reach out on social media, but does anything really happen? Every single one of those emails is always responded to. And folks were telling us, hey, when I hear you referring to the show or referring to a free guide, I couldn't find it. So we really wanted to take out the mystery behind how you can find the podcast, how you can maybe subscribe to it in a different podcast player if you changed your phone or you wanted to try a different podcast player. All of those are linked really easily. The homepage looks a little bit different now. People were also saying, okay, I hear you talking about the free weekly newsletter on the podcast. I went to the homepage, I couldn't find it. So we changed that as well. So when you head over to shiftingschools.com, getting to the free guides is just one click away now. I think, Jeff, it used to be two, but we're busy people, right? So sometimes that second click, it can just be a little bit too much. The podcast is right there on the homepage. And Jeff, my favorite new feature that's there on the homepage as well. I think you get to tell people about it. I'm excited about it. I'm going to be quiet though and just listen to you talk more about it.
Yeah. So Trisha, of course, is always trying to find ways to involve the community. I mean, we always are trying to find ways to involve the community, but Trisha came across this website that's called podinabox.com. And I don't know if any of our listeners have used it with other podcasts, but we just got it set up. So it's podinabox.com/shifting schools pod. So if you go to podinabox.com/shifting schools pod, you can now leave us. It's very simple, a simple website. You know what? One thing I love is when things are simple. They do one thing and they do them really well. Whenever I'm looking for technology to use with schools, to use with students, I want simple technology that does one thing really well. And that's what this website does. You go to the website, you click on the little red button that says record, and you get to leave us an audio comment. We'd love to get your feedback. So nobody's left a comment yet. Part of us doing this episode is, does this work? We don't know. So if you could go over there and leave us a comment and just say, hey, Jeff and Trisha, it works. That would be great. If you have feedback on any one of our episodes, things that you like, things that you don't like about the podcast, how can we make this resource better for you? This is a place for you to be able to reach out. Of course, you can always email us at info@shiftingschools.com, but it's always great also to get your voice involved. So much more feeling and expression comes through audio, which is one of the reasons why we love podcasts. So if you could head over there again, and there's a button right on the homepage. When we were reworking the homepage, Trisha was very adamant that there was a button over to Pod in a Box, our Pod in the Box page, so people could actually leave us voice recording. So if you could head over there, and we'll make sure it's in the show notes of this update episode. But again, if you go to shiftingschools.com, you can click on the red button there and leave us a little voice memo. That would be awesome. Also, on the front page, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Jeff, you and I think, really believe it's so important to leverage the experience of educators, right? We often don't see educators getting enough credit. And so I'm thinking of this week's episode with Jennifer Lagarde. Some of you know her as the library girl. She walked through why, when we're talking about social emotional learning, we have to talk about information literacy as well. And we know that there are hundreds of educators who are out there listening and thinking, we're doing that work at our school. Jeff and I would love to hear about it. So that's the perfect example of, you want to share the story of how your school is intersecting SEL and information lit? head to shiftingschools.com, that red microphone button. It's like a half scroll down on the page. Click it. Let us know what you're doing. Again, we would love, love, love to leverage your experience to help you tell the story of how these important topics, how they're happening at your campus too.
Yeah, and the other thing I think you'll find over there on the homepage, and we weren't very clear on this before, was just all the places we are on social. And so again, right underneath that red button where you can leave us an audio comment, you can also follow us on hopefully the social network that you are using for your own professional growth. If you follow us on Twitter, Twitter has been kind of the main one that we started with. And whenever I'm working with schools and working with businesses, we always start with one social network, and then you kind of expand from there. Kind of get your feet wet, start building your community, and expand from there. And that's the same thing we've done at Shifting Schools as well. You can do that as a classroom teacher. What's the one social network you want to start with your students, and you can expand from there. So we kind of started with Twitter, and we've extended out now. We've now, if you're on Instagram, you can follow us at Shifting Schools and at Shifting Schools Pod. And we've started getting into TikTok. I think Trish and I both, I remember that meeting, Trisha, the little behind the scenes here. Trisha and I were having a meeting. We're like, do we really want to do TikTok? Are we too old for TikTok? What's going to go on in TikTok? How do you make a TikTok? And so we've kind of been really focused on that. If you are a teacher on TikTok, we'd love to hear your feedback. You can follow us at Shifting Schools Pod as well. And Trisha, you were just sent me literally before we started recording this New York Times article on how Gen Z uses TikTok as a search engine. You want to talk about that a little bit?
I do. Yeah, Jeff, when you and I were debating whether or not we should take the plunge and try out TikTok for ourselves, we have always advocated that tools that our students are tinkering with, we need to familiarize ourselves with them. I think it's important for us to experience what's going on with that algorithm. What are some of the creative outputs there? What is it going to mean? I mean, TikTok is a gigantic industry now. When I'm thinking about writing skills, I think, honestly, I don't know how useful it is anymore to be really just solely focusing on the essay. What might it mean instead if I'm having my learners focus on what does it mean to write a 15-second TikTok script, right? And thinking about the media that they engage with, the media that's creating a lot of different career pathways. And so just this week, Kaylee Huang has published this incredible piece in the New York Times. We'll link to it in the show notes. It's called For Gen Z, TikTok is the New Search Engine. And it walks through the ways that, again, those of you who have young people in your life, they're probably already telling you they're doing research in that space. And if you hear that and you scoff, Jeff, I will say, the thing that I've taken away from our experiment with TikTok is how much I've appreciated learning from what librarians are doing in that space. Like, Book Talk is amazing. So, I find myself too doing research, like, what's the book that I'm going to read next? I'm finding myself in that space as a researcher as well. So I know that sometimes we can be dismissive of social media, but I think it's really important that we consider playing around with it, see what's going on in that space, because there are some amazing conversations, some amazing folks to follow. And if you're listening to this and nodding along and there's someone who you are learning a lot from on TikTok, head over to shiftingschools.com, hit that red button, tell us who you appreciate following, and again, how you're seeing that becoming and evolving as a space for learning, because it is. And it's interesting to talk, I think, to teens in our life about how they're using it in that regard too.
Yeah. And I mean, this matches up with so much that is the ethos of Shifting Schools. Ethos number one, preparing students for their future, not our past. And whether or not you like TikTok, you are an educator. It's not your job to say, oh, I only like Facebook or I only like Instagram. No, we have to put ourselves in our students' shoes. And for better or for worse, the kids are headed to TikTok. I'm not saying you have to go over there and spend hours and hours a day. I'm not even saying you have to post a TikTok, but you need to know it exists. You need to understand what's going on over there so that you can be relevant for our students and their future. That's number one. Number two, one of our ethos at Shifting Schools is fail fast, fail loud. And we do a lot of failing. Maybe we're not always transparent about it. And if you'd like to hear more about the failings we've had, please do leave us a voice comment, and we will let you know that. But if you want to see a company who and people struggling in a new social network and laugh and watch us evolve, that might be another reason to go watch the Shifting Schools Pod TikTok account. We're trying multiple different things. Some things we're trying to get traction on, some things aren't. Trisha just got done talking about book talks. Trisha, you've been playing around with different filters, different ways to do book talks because you read so many books. And so you've been playing around with that. And, at the same time, you've mixing in TikToks of your puppy. And why are TikToks of your puppy getting more views than TikToks of we're trying to figure it out. So if you just want to watch a couple of old folks, for lack of a better term, try to figure out a new technology, you might want to just follow our individual accounts as well. You can find Trisha at Trisha_Freed, which is her same as her Twitter account, correct? It's the same as
That's
your Twitter
right.
account. And I'm at Jeff Udick over there. I'm posting all kinds of random stuff because I don't know what I'm doing yet. But that's what happens when you start learning, right? You get into a space, you figure it out, and you start to build from there. And so it might be, if you just want to watch us figure out a space. They're not the best polished videos. They're not even the best edited videos because we're just figuring it out for ourselves and for Shifting Schools. And so it might just be another great way to follow us, to be like, oh, look at how they're streamlining this part, or they're no longer making those mistakes, or their audio is getting better, or the videos are getting better, or they're getting condensed, or they're getting longer, depending on what's going on. So it might be, just from a research standpoint, it might be worth giving us a follow just to see what the heck we're doing over there as we
there's no dancing. Well. If you're worried about that, we're not trying on any of the TikTok dances. Don't worry about that.
We're not doing, yeah.
Jeff, I think about the
we're not dancing yet. Yeah.
Maybe we will. Yes. Thank you for pointing that out. It could change. But for our listeners who teach business or entrepreneurship, again, I think the TikTok space is really interesting. I really love independent bookstores. So there is a whole gigantic field of independent bookstores who are on TikTok, who are doing really interesting things. I could see that being a great conversation to have with teens as well, to look at how that social media space is being leveraged for them. And again, to talk about how the voice of marketing changes, comparing how a bookstore perhaps markets their materials on TikTok versus how they might do it on Twitter, which, as you mentioned, Jeff, slightly older demographic, versus try to find some of their print stuff or look at their website. Again, I think when we talk about teaching writing, and we're talking about teaching writing for context, toggling between different social media networks is really interesting to see. Even we mentioned the New York Times piece. Look at how the New York Times communicates on TikTok versus how they do it maybe via one of their podcasts.
Great idea.
And again, looking at how they are trying to appeal to different audiences.
And if you are a teacher and you're sitting here listening to this saying, why are they going on about TikTok? I don't need another social network. I hate that. I hate that thing. I don't get it. I don't want to. Okay, don't. That's 100% fine. Follow us on Instagram or whatever social media that you want to follow us on. There's plenty of different places to do it. But here's what you need to understand. Genres have changed. When I was in school, we wrote, persuasive and narrative and expository. There are different genres for this generation. When we're talking about preparing students for their future, not our past, how do we bring those different genres? You do not need to have your students post their assignment to TikTok, but you could use TikTok as a genre to say, what if you gave me a book talk in the genre of TikTok? What if you did a book talk in the genre of Instagram? What would that look like? Use it as a genre that students then have to put themselves in that space. And to your point, you could go look at, how does the New York Times use their website, their digital newspaper, versus how they use TikTok, how they use Instagram, how they use Twitter. And we're just using the New York Times because we talked about that article. But you could do this with any one of these products and start thinking about, it's a genre. It's not a website. Don't think of it as social. It's a genre. It's short video clips that constantly are playing over and over and over again. That's a new genre, and we have to bring that into our classroom. We have to help kids understand. And what happens if it motivates kids to do their work? What a nice extra added bonus, because we're actually speaking the language of a generation. So I think there's just a lot here that we can unpack, and we can keep unpacking. And if that is something you want to unpack more on this podcast, again, head over to shiftingschools.com, leave us an audio memo and say, I'd love more ideas of how to do that in my classroom. That's what we're about here. We're here for you. We just had an email. I'd love to talk about this. We had an email about 2 weeks ago from a listener who said, I'd love to learn more about schools who are doing cool things with social media. We said, fantastic. And Trisha, what do we have coming up for them?
We're going to have a panel coming up where, again, we've reached out. We asked folks point us to some of your favorite members of your team who are leveraging social media on the marketing side. So we will have them actually speak, and we'll be sure to link to that school's social media so that you can be looking at it. And again, if you teach business or entrepreneurship, what an interesting lesson to do in terms of looking at different schools, looking at the ways in which, you teach ethos, logos, pathos, filter it through how schools are telling their story. If you have juniors or seniors, grade 11, grade 12 students, maybe do that with universities and colleges. I think it would be rare for a university or a college today not to be on TikTok. Look at how are they trying to connect with students, break down some of the advertising that they're doing. And, Jeff, to your point about asking students, again, maybe you're creating a TikTok video that summarizes a recent assessment. Jeff, as you said, no, it doesn't have to be posted on TikTok, right? We're looking at that as a genre. For those of you who maybe are using Canva, which again is free for schools to use, Canva has TikTok templates. So students could actually go there, create a TikTok video in that style that's there. And then, it's submitted to your LMS, right? We're not talking about necessarily having to have kids be on the app in the class. But, I'm thinking, Jeff, we're 49 or 50 days away from midterm elections in the US. Look at, if you're teaching civics, look at what different politicians are doing with social media. That's a really interesting thing to be talking about as well. When we're talking about the art of persuasion, or we're talking about communication, breaking down even a 60-second TikTok video, that's going to be a lengthy conversation. And I think, to me, the most important thing is we're teaching our students to be critical consumers of the media that's the most authentic to them, right? Many of our students are in that space. Who's helping them think critically about how they engage with the content in that space?
Yeah, so there's just a lot to unpack here, and we just wanted to take a moment in this update episode to talk about some of the updates that we're working on over at Shifting Schools. We have one last update that I want to talk about. You should hopefully be seeing this pop up in your podcast player soon. But we have gone in and we've restructured our artwork for the podcast. For those of you who've been longtime subscribers to the podcast, it's just been a white background that said Shifting Schools or Shifting Our Schools. We've taken the hour out, trying again to streamline things. So we're just calling it Shifting Schools Podcast. And we've got new artwork. I'm not going to tell you what it is. I'm not going to give it away, but hopefully you see that pop up. And again, we'd love to get some feedback on that. Does it work for you? Do you understand what you're going to get when you see that artwork? And we're really good at taking feedback, because we fail fast, fail loud all the time around here. So if everybody comes back and says that's really horrible, we have no problem changing it again. We're not married to it for a year or something like that. But we would love to get your feedback on it. It should be popping up it might take a week or two to get to all the players. And also, if you are in a player, if you have a podcast player that you like and you're not being able to find the Shifting Schools podcast, please do let us know. I do believe we are everywhere, but podcasting is becoming so popular and there are so many different players out there. We might not be in one of your favorites. So we can always do that. That's something we can do on our end as well. So, but just a lot of great updates. You might want to head over to Shifting Schools. Again, you will make Trisha's day. If you really want to just make Trisha's day, leave us an audio recording over there and let us know it works. and B, give us a shout out about something that you're learning. Again, I think this is also a great time to be talking about this with this week's episode, all about that intersection of SEL and information literacy. If you haven't listened to this week's episode, I think it's worth a listen at least 2 or 3 times. There's a ton of stuff in there.
Well, Jeff, I think just to make it a bit more appetizing to get folks to try out that new feature of leaving us a voicemail, I think the first 10 people who leave us a voicemail might get a little surprise. Is that fair to say, Jeff?
Well, I don't know. You just sprung this on me while we're live recording.
I surprised you as well.
Yeah, you surprised me as well. What are we going to give them? What do you think?
I think actually, we're talking about the power of media, both being consumers. We always advocate for being creators. We do have a great self-paced pathway that is all about getting started with podcasts. Jeff, you and I have both done podcasting with students. It is probably one of the most meaningful learning experiences I've been a part of, again, is empowering students to collaborate. We're talking about different skills in terms of being a modern day writer, producing a podcast together as a group of students, that collaborative writing experience where they have an authentic audience. It's amazing. So I think maybe for the first few people who reach out to us and send us that voicemail, what do you think, Jeff? Can we give them that self-paced pathway on launching a podcast on the house?
Sure. What the heck? Doesn't matter. How many? Do you want to do the first 10?
That sounds good to me. Yep.
First 10 people who leave us an audio recording over there on podintheBox.com/shiftingschoolspod. Or again, go to shiftingschools.com, go down and click on that maroon button. First 10 people are going to get the free pathway all about podcasting. And you can hear more about what's in that pathway and some of the other free guide stuff at the webinar we just finished today as well. Over anywhere on the social medias, over to youtube.com. You can find us over there now and check out that free webinar where we go through some of that stuff. So, all right, Trisha, you got me on that one. And I don't know, maybe there's going to be a free guide. I'll get you back. How about this? Maybe there's a free guide coming out soon around 5 ways to use TikTok in the classroom. I mean, maybe we could make one of those to put in the free resource webinar or free resource center as well. So maybe
that sounds fair. That sounds fair. All right, we better wrap up the conversation because I've got to get to work on that then.
All right, thanks everyone. Hope you've enjoyed this. Just a quick update episode, little bonus here for you. Until next time, we'll see you on the network.